nationally and internationally, and in his own work and the work that he programs, he really pursues an exploratory sense of music based in improvisation. I was sitting at my desk a few years ago, and Steve popped his head up from the basement. He goes, "What are you doing? I'll show you something." And I come downstairs, and he's got this couple little turntables set up, and he had a couple of these vinyls. He had salvaged some albums that we made for an art project by Julio Morales, and cut them up and put them together with other albums. And he's sort of done this now for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's been a continuing, growing thing. He was just pridefully displaying a new turntable to us today that he got online at Goodwill, and thought he would be a beautiful little centerpiece for our presentation tonight. And so please welcome Steve Baczkowski.
Thank you very much. As John mentioned, my name is Steve Baczkowski, and in addition to being the music director here at Hallwalls, I'm also primarily a saxophone player by trade. And I'm very interested in improvisation, and become developing all sorts of techniques to use all sorts of sound resources in my improvisations. And at some point along the way, I started using electronics, some loop pedals and samplers and things like that, in order to kind of enhance the sound environment that I could play in. And it was interesting. I could do lots of things with those pedals, but at a certain point, I lost my relationship with them. Like a sampler, you sort of press a button and it makes this wonderful sound, but you really don't have much relationship with it. And where the effects pedals, some magic thing would go on inside the box and the sound would change, and I didn't feel so connected to them. So I started messing around with these old record players. I bought this from the Olean Public Library about 12 years ago, I think, or 11 years ago now. And there are these wonderful old library turntables that are built like tanks, and they can take a lot of abuse. And I started finding different records that I liked, and just sort of using them as a sound environment. And this is an old record from the 1940s that was recorded at someone's home in Buffalo, singing along with a piano the Psalms. It says here Psalm 23rd Psalm, and it's actually just a woman singing soprano along with a piano. Now I've got an off-centered hole, and it's a 78 slowed down to 16 speed. So you have this result. And so I can set up this record, and along the way I wanted to get more involved in the records themselves, so I would melt them, I'd put in extra holes and things like that, and I would use sound effects records, animal sounds and birds and whales, and that was really interesting. But then I wanted to get more involved in the records themselves, and I took a cue from the great artist and musician Christian Marclay, who famously in the 80s began to cut up records and glue them back together. Matter of fact, he did that at Hallwalls, I think in 1984. And so I sat down with a candle and a box cutter, and I heated up a razor blade and started to slice apart my first records. And I sliced them into 4 parts. And this is the first one I made. After I sliced them apart, and I had to slice 4 records into 4 parts to get one record, I'd sand them down very carefully, and then slowly I would super glue them together with crazy glue and gel glue and liquid glue and many layers and sanding. So eventually it's kind of a record again. So this was the first record I made, and I was like, spending a couple of days working on it going, I wonder what the hell this is going to sound like. So this is what happened. You get the idea. And what's interesting, And I wish I had a presentation like this every time I played, because people wouldn't think I was so strange. Because what happens is your brain starts to make sense of this information. And obviously you'll notice you hear the divisions between the records. It's of course impossible to line up the grooves so that the needle could freely move between them. But these things, you know, they're built like tanks, and they can really take a lot of abuse. And so you end up getting, in this case, a 4-beat pattern. So you hear the 4 beats and you get the rhythm, but you end up hearing the information on the individual records in between. And, you know, this is some sort of house beat record. This is another dance record. This is a 78 from the 40s. And this is some sort of marching band record, Stars and Stripes. It's interesting because that way I ended up getting not only a loop kind of effect with a beat, but also a sampler effect with different sounds. Now you hear, I can take my other record arm and give you both sides of the record. There's one side. And this side. So there you go. So I started finding, you know, eventually different ways how I could create pieces that had some sort of shape and movement, and I just developed different techniques, putting weights. Sometimes I actually will physically, you know, play the tone arm itself because it's a very resonant. So you hear everything that you do with it. So it was fun to find different ways that I could deal with it like that, and you know, I just, you know, would attach, say, like a spring like this, and I wouldn't attach it to my sweater. I would actually just attach it to here, and then you get to hear the sound of the spring. Normally I would turn the volume down and I'd be much more slick about it, but you know, it's kind of fun to have this demonstration sort of. So I found, you know, all these wonderful ways of you know, and sometimes if I have them all, I'll put 6 music boxes and you hear this insane symphony of music boxes. And I would find different records, and sometimes I'd assemble them just because the records themselves looked really cool and I just liked the way the records looked. I glue other records on top, like those little floppy records, so I'd get new information that would, you know, interrupt the information that was already on the record. Sometimes a little 78 or a 45, and then I started getting into 3s. You know, if you're going to do 4, eventually you get tired of 4 and you want to do 3. And I have a lovely record in 3. Sometimes finding the records is the hardest thing, finding the one you want. But look, I can play this one. It was playing earlier, and this one is made of all music box records. Because it's in 3, you get a 6, 8, or 12 pattern. And eventually they'll find their way into a loop. And it's interesting because your brain, even if you have the strangest records from different eras and different sounds and different times, once it repeats a few times, your brain just wants to hear like they were built for each other and they were just waiting for a few decades and some weirdo to cut them up and put them together so they could play their There's an example of 3, and I'll do one more just to give you an idea. This was my most recent effort where I wanted to make a record that was in 5, and this was the first one in 5. And I took some other pieces from it, and I made a record that had non-straight lines. It's not divided in okai, and it has some extra information added here. So because some of them are from the same source, they can work together well. Sometimes they don't. And the fun thing about this is that I never know what they're going to do. I only have so much control. You know, I get an idea of, you know, what works or what might work, and I try it. And I just hope for the best. And then usually what I do, if I get something I really like, I'll play a saxophone or some other instrument along with it, and that is a lot of fun. But this one I really like to play with because it has some sound effects, a harp record, and themes from the movies in the 50s.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm just going up. Okay. That was great. It's like absolutely free. King Kong or something.